Money 24-hour expiry. Midnight bankrupt. Have you ever felt like money just disappears? I don't mean spending. I mean really disappearing. Like one moment it's there, and the next it's gone without any explanation.
It's coming! Run for your lives! Move! Get out of the street!
Now imagine this. It's 11:59 p.m. You're at home. Everything feels normal. The world is quiet, predictable, and for a moment, you actually feel in control. There's money on the table. Bills, maybe some coins, just sitting there, exactly where you left them. Nothing strange, nothing unusual, just another ordinary night. Then the clock hits midnight. And just like that, it's gone. Not stolen, not lost, not misplaced. It doesn't fall, it doesn't burn. It simply stops existing.
Help! I'm gonna miss the deadline!
As if reality itself decided to erase it. Within seconds, the city begins to break. People freeze at first, confused, staring at empty hands and open wallets, waiting for something to come back that never will. Then the panic starts. People running through the streets, shouting, checking their pockets over and over again, like repetition might somehow fix it, but it doesn't. It never does. And right in the middle of all that chaos, there's me. Walking calmly, hands in my pockets, watching everything unfold, like I've already seen it before. All right, I haven't introduced myself. My name is Lexter. And no, this isn't a documentary. Although honestly, it probably should be. Because in this world, there's only one rule. Every single night, at exactly midnight, all money disappears. No exceptions, no warnings, no second chances. You can try to save it, hide it, protect it. It won't matter. When the clock hits 12, it's over. And when you take something as important as money away from people, you start to see who they really are. Because not everyone reacts the same way.
But when the clock struck midnight, the real chaos would not begin in the streets. It would begin inside people's minds. Because if money suddenly stopped existing, not everyone would react the same way. There would be certain kinds of people, and almost all of them would be defined by their relationship with finance. First, there would be the accumulators, the ones who spent their whole lives saving, stacking cash, building accounts, investing every dollar with discipline, only to watch all of it become meaningless in a single night. They would not just lose money, they would lose years of security, control, and sacrifice. Then there would be the indebted, the ones who until yesterday were drowning in loans, credit cards, monthly payments, and interest. And for the first time, in the middle of all that chaos, they might feel something close to relief. Because if money disappears, debt disappears with it. What would be a tragedy for some would feel like a strange kind of freedom for others. There would also be the investors and speculators, the ones who always knew how to move capital, read markets, and spot opportunities before anyone else. But this time, there would be no chart to study, no asset to protect, no safe haven to run toward. Because this would not be a financial crash, it would be the end of the game itself. And finally, there would be those who understand real value, the ones who would realize faster than anyone else that money was never true wealth, only an agreement. In a world without bills, banks, or prices, they would begin to trade in something else: food, water, energy, knowledge, protection, connections. Because when money dies, what survives is not fortune, but usefulness. And that is when everything would change. Because at 11:59, the richest people in the world would still look untouchable. But at 12:01, power would no longer belong to the one who has the most, but to the one who knows how to provide what others need. At the end, the silence was gone. Not because people had found answers, but because uncertainty had started moving through the building like a living thing. It was in the footsteps in the hallway, in the doors that opened and closed too quickly, in the way voices dropped when someone new walked into the room. The shock of midnight had passed. Now came the harder part, living inside what it had changed. At first, everyone kept pretending there might still be a way back. Some held on to routines with almost religious precision. They sorted papers, checked empty accounts, refreshed frozen systems, repeated old prices as if the numbers themselves could rebuild the world they had belonged to. But every hour made the truth more difficult to avoid.
The index closed at 29,512. Volume was light at 700 million shares. Gold is up slightly at $16.50 an ounce.
The old language still existed, yet it no longer translated reality. And that was when people began to notice something unsettling. The ones who had once seemed most secure were no longer the ones others turned to first. The older saver felt it in small humiliations. No one mocked him, no one blamed him, no one even dismissed him. It was worse than that. They simply stopped looking at his lifelong discipline as a form of power. The envelopes, the records, the stacks of carefully protected cash, all the things that once represented caution and wisdom, now sat around him like artifacts from a civilization that had mistaken preparation for permanence. For the first time in his life, he had done everything right and still found himself asking a question he had never trained for. Useful to whom? The young man who had spent years drowning in debt felt something stranger. The pressure that had defined him was gone, but in its place came a kind of exposed emptiness. Without the old shame, he did not immediately become confident or free. He became visible to himself, to others. For years, his life had been narrated by what he owed. Now that voice had gone quiet, and he had to discover whether there was anything underneath it besides exhaustion. It frightened him more than he expected. The investors deteriorated differently. At first, they spoke with calm, almost mechanical certainty, using familiar words like recovery, correction, temporary distortion, stabilization. But even as they said them, those words sounded thinner than before. They still dressed the same, still sat in the same posture, still stared at glowing screens like believers waiting for a miracle. Yet every hour revealed the same brutal fact. Their knowledge had not disappeared, but its authority had. They could still describe movements, they just could not explain meaning anymore. And while those three groups struggled to understand what they had lost, another kind of person began to rise almost by accident. Not the loudest, not the richest, not the most educated in the traditional sense, just the people who knew how to do things that remained real when abstraction collapsed. A woman who knew how to organize food without causing panic. A man who could repair broken locks and generators. A nurse who understood which medicines mattered most and which symptoms could not wait. Someone who knew how to preserve water. Someone who could cook for 10 people with what used to feed 2. Someone who remembered who lived alone, who had children, who was too proud to ask for help, who was pretending to be calmer than they really were. The building had never valued these people properly before. It noticed them now. That shift did not feel inspiring. It felt embarrassing. Because everyone could sense what it revealed. The old world had rewarded visibility, ownership, accumulation, performance. This new reality, however unstable, was rewarding steadiness, usefulness, patience, memory, trust. Skills that once lived quietly in the background were moving to the center, and those who had built their identity on the old hierarchy were forced to watch themselves become less relevant by the hour. By evening, people had started forming small circles. Not official groups, not declared alliances, just clusters of necessity. A few apartments shared food, others shared tools. A corridor became a place where information mattered more than status. Someone began keeping track of supplies, not to control them, but to prevent waste. Someone else started checking on the elderly. In another corner of the building, arguments broke out over what should be shared and what should still belong to the individual. The new world was not being born in harmony, it was being negotiated in real time, through discomfort. And underneath it all was a feeling no one wanted to name: resentment. Not loud resentment, not yet. Something quieter and more dangerous. The resentment of people discovering that what once made them important no longer guaranteed them a place at the center. The resentment of those who had always been overlooked and were now suddenly needed. The resentment of dependence. The resentment of realizing that survival had become intimate. Because that was the real transformation taking place. Money had not only disappeared as a system of value, it had stopped protecting people from one another, from needing one another, from being measured in ways that felt direct, human, and impossible to outsource. You can no longer hide inside a title, or a balance, or a prediction. Sooner or later, everyone had to bring something real into the room, and not everyone had learned how. By the third night, the building was no longer in shock. It was becoming something else, something provisional, something uneasy, a place where old instincts still fought for space, but where new instincts were gaining ground. You could feel both worlds pressing against each other in every conversation. The old one, built on distance, ownership, and controlled appearances. The new one, messy and uncomfortable, built on proximity, need, and the dangerous honesty of being useful. No one knew which version of human nature would win. Not yet. But in the half-lit corridor, with supplies changing hands and voices carrying softly through open doors, one thing was becoming impossible to ignore. Midnight had not just taken away money, it had begun revealing who people were when value could no longer be impersonated.
It did not take long for usefulness to become influence. At first, people were simply grateful for the ones who knew what to do, the ones who could organize food, repair what broke, calm the panic, and keep things moving when the old world had stopped making sense. But gratitude does not stay simple for long. Soon, people began asking harder questions. Who decides what gets shared? Who decides what gets saved? Who decides whose needs matter first? And little by little, the hallway stopped feeling like a place of survival and started feeling like a place of judgment. The woman who had quietly become essential could feel it first. The same people who trusted her now watched her more carefully. Every decision carried weight. Every choice left someone uneasy. And behind that uneasiness, something familiar began to return. Not money, authority. The older man felt it too. For the first time since midnight, he realized he still had something the new world needed: structure, lists, order, memory. He began helping organize supplies, keeping track of what came in and what went out. Some people found comfort in that. Others saw danger, because once things start being counted, people begin to wonder what comes next. The young man who had lived under debt recognized it immediately. He had only just escaped one life measured by numbers, and now another way of measuring people was beginning to appear. Not as money, but as contribution, as fairness, as worth. Even the investors saw the shape of it: scarcity, trust, exchange, reputation, the raw pieces of a new system. And for the first time since midnight, they began to sound almost confident again. That was when the building truly split. Not between rich and poor, not between prepared and unprepared, but between those who wanted this new world to remain human and those who wanted to make it legible, ordered, and measurable again. By the fourth night, people were no longer just adapting. They were deciding what kind of world would replace the one that died at midnight. And in the half-lit corridor, with supplies moving from hand to hand and every voice carrying a hidden fear, one truth became impossible to ignore. Money had disappeared in a single night, but the hunger to turn value into power had survived. When money disappeared, people were left with only what was real: fear, need, skill, and each other. And somehow, that was enough to begin again. The end of money did not create a new world. It only revealed the one that had been hiding inside people all along. And what's your conclusion about the video? If something like this happened, which type of person would you identify with?
Leave your opinion in the comment section. If you're enjoying the video and want to master your financial game, subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Let's get back to the video.